It's your Wednesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Really good show coming up. Talked to a couple of friends of mine, regular podcast guest Keith Rashad and longtime friend Tim Klobuchar. We are going to take you on a little trip down memory lane. Today is 25 years since the Vikings lost to the Falcons in the NFC title game. I know it's hard to believe a quarter of a century has passed since then. Lavelle Neal wrote a column about it in today's Star Tribune and on StarTribune.com. You can read that as well. But we took a little journey just back to that time, what it was like to watch the Vikings in that moment, that season, what that game meant. We had different perspectives on it. Keith was there. I was supposed to be there with him, but I ended up working. It was very early on in my Star Tribune tenure. In fact, I was on a temporary 6-month temporary assignment with the Star Tribune. I was still a student technically at the University of Minnesota. I was finishing up some coursework. Tim and I ended up watching that game in a small room at the Star Tribune, charting plays for that game with the expectation that we were going to be writing about a team heading to the Super Bowl. And then, of course, we weren't. So we will take you on a little trip. It doesn't have to be a painful trip. It's just kind of like a look back at what that time was like. So check out that in just a little bit here. I've got some NFL hiring, coaching thoughts at the end of the show. First, though, what did I miss? If you thought Diamond Sports and its Bally Sports regional sports networks were on their way out, might have to detour those expectations. A big news emerging Wednesday morning, Diamond Sports and Sinclair have reached an agreement that might keep Diamond Sports afloat beyond 2024. Let me explain here. Diamond Sports has been in bankruptcy for almost a year now. Looked to be basically winding down its operations. Instead, reports that they have settled their pending litigation with Sinclair, their parent company, for close to $500 million and gotten an influx of cash from a partnership with Amazon, which I'll get to in a little bit, for more than $100 million. Those two things combined will give them the cash they need to buy out their senior creditors, the ones that wanted to liquidate the company instead of keep it going, and allow them to stay solvent and keep operating independently beyond this season. What does that mean here? 3 things I think that means. Number one, if it looked like this was a company in a wind down, that they were kind of like looking to wrap up operations after this 2024 season, looked like MLB was trending that way. They'd already signed these short-term 1-year deals with the NBA and NHL to wind down after this season and be done. Those contracts were shortened. If it looked like that's where they were headed, instead now it looks like they are trying to sustain operations beyond this season. Now, what does that mean for those negotiations that just wrapped up with the NHL and NBA? That's a good question. Maybe those contracts get honored and they have to renegotiate after this year. Maybe it throws this whole thing into upheaval again. With baseball, it's particularly interesting because baseball and Diamond Sports were in the process of negotiating a similar deal from everybody's understanding. Those were deep discussions. Those were maybe going to wrap up this week. Instead, now that gets thrown into a bit of chaos. So the upshot here is that if you thought that this was headed in a different direction, if you thought that there's only going to be at the most 1 year more of Diamond Sports in the picture of these kind of regional sports networks being run by Diamond Sports, that may no longer be the case. Now, another piece of this is that Sinclair is now potentially out of the picture, Amazon into the picture as a potential streaming partner, giving an influx of cash over $100 million. A bunch of these MLB games for 5 teams already in 2024 could wind up on Amazon Prime Video. Now, the New York Post reported the Twins were one of those 5 teams. For my information, that is not accurate. The Twins are not one of those 5 teams, and in fact, the Twins are still one of those teams very much in limbo right now. They don't have a TV contract yet for 2024. Their contract with Diamond expired at the end of the 23 season, and they've been trying to negotiate, along with a bunch of these other Diamond Sports teams, a deal for 24 and potentially beyond now, I guess. So we thought there might be some clarity on that this week. That does not seem like it's going to happen. We might be into mid-February or even later before we know exactly how the Twins are going to be shown on TV and streamed this year. So that piece of it adds a new wrinkle of upheaval to all of this. And the Amazon piece is really interesting to me because Major League Baseball reportedly a couple weeks ago, Rob Manfred said, while Diamond was negotiating something with Amazon, I think this was a report in the New York Post, and that was after a report from the Wall Street Journal suggested the two sides were trying to get something done. Major League Baseball didn't want that. They didn't want to give streaming rights to all the Bally sports teams to Amazon. They wanted to negotiate directly with Amazon as cut out that middle partner. Well, now, if they're going to be around longer, if Diamond Sports is going to be around longer, and they're having these streaming rights on Amazon, what does that mean? Major League Baseball can't be happy. I would think, at least in the short-term thinking, Amazon has kind of wedged itself in here as a partner with Diamond Sports. Could it eventually mean more teams will wind up streaming on Amazon? Could this fragment things a little bit? Will things no longer wind up on the MLB app? I don't know. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit there, but what it means in the short term is that 5 teams sound like they will be streamed through Amazon. That will be the platform for them as soon as this year, potentially, as long as this deal, in fact, is happening. So this is interesting to me. This kind of throws a new wrinkle into it. It could mean Diamond is around for longer. Quoting here, Diamond CEO David Preschlack said, "We are thrilled to have reached a comprehensive restructuring agreement that provides a detailed framework for a reorganization plan and substantial new financing that will enable Diamond to operate and thrive beyond 2024. So there you go. That's the upshot of it. Diamond might be around longer than 2024. What that means for the Twins and other teams remains to be seen. But if you thought they were winding things down, if you thought that this was going away after 2024, that might no longer be the case. We might have to wait longer to find out exactly what the Twins are doing in 2024 and beyond as well.
Grand Casino would like to take a moment and salute the true football fan. The passion, the hope, the anticipation, that incomparable feeling of winning. Grand Casino would also like to take a moment to remind you that you can find all that anticipation, thrill, and winning at Grand Casino. Grand Casino, let your story begin.
It's a very special, kind of sad day on Daily Delivery. We're going to talk about 25 years ago.
You go ahead and laugh at my pain. Go ahead.
25 years ago. By the way, first of all, I can't believe it was 25 years ago, gentlemen. Keith Rashad, a regular guest on this show for Vikings Poetry, joins me. Tim Klobuchar, longtime friend of mine. He's been on before, too. You were on the Gophers football episode from North Carolina earlier this year, right? Yeah, you were.
No, actually, I wasn't.
Oh,
you
missed that. That's right, because you were gone by then. Sorry.
So, long time, first time here.
You were at the game, though. That's right. So
yes.
We're going to talk about whether we like it or not.
Tight ship that Daily Delivery is known for here.
I forgot that he wasn't there. Anyway, he was there in spirit. We're going to talk about this, whether we like it or not. It came to my attention that this is the 25-year anniversary, Wednesday, today, of Vikings losing to the Falcons. I don't exactly know why I'm going to make you guys relive this, other than the fact that we were all
because
kind
you
of
don't like us very much.
I do like you very much, but we were all kind of connected in a way, right? Like, I was supposed to go to the game with you, Keith. We had tickets that year, and then I ended up working with you, Tim, because we were employees of the Star Tribune at the time, very early on in that tenure, and kind of at the last minute, our sports editor Glenn Crevier asked us if we would going to do this like quarter by quarter, like play of the quarter thing for the newspaper long before the internet was a big deal. This was like for the next day's newspaper, and watch the game on like a tiny TV in the video, essentially like I don't even remember what that room was.
No, I don't either. There must have been printers in there or something like that. I don't
know why we were
exactly.
in there. It had like the TVs were not good or big.
It's where the TV was, yeah.
The TV. It was the TV. That's where we could go watch the game. I was angry for a while that I didn't get to go, but Keith, I guess in retrospect, that was probably just as well.
Yeah, that year we had those were back in the days when they were still struggling to sell tickets, or that they had to do promotions every now and then. And we purchased the quote unquote cat package
Is
for
that what it
the
was?
season tickets. Yes.
Okay.
So we had tickets against the Jaguars, the Lions, and the Panthers
Did
for the
not
regular
remember
season.
that.
Yes. And they absolutely destroyed all three of those teams during the regular season. And so, of course, they're 15-1. And we're like, well, we have to buy the playoff tickets. Now, keep in mind, this was 25 years ago. We were in a slightly different socioeconomic status at the
Yes.
time. Okay.
Yes.
So maybe not with the secure jobs that we have nowadays.
No.
And so
Mike was literally a temporary reporter at the time. He
I
and
was a
I were
temporary
both.
reporter at the time. Yes, it was like
Yes.
6 months into like a temporary gig, and I was still technically in school. Like I still had a year or like a few classes to finish up that next year. So yes, we were not living large at that moment of our lives.
No, we're students at the University of Minnesota, and these were expensive. This was an investment,
Yes.
but they were 15-1, and this was the team that was going to go to the Super Bowl. The first team in our lifetimes that we were conscious of going to the Super Bowl. I was
Yes.
alive for the fourth one, and
Yes.
but far too young to have any memories
Right.
whatsoever of it. So this felt like it was an important investment that we needed to make after years, after our quote unquote years of suffering as college students watching this team, that this was going to be the one where they finally get over the hump and get to the Super Bowl. And we were going to be there to celebrate with our cat package.
Cat package. The cat package. Keith, weren't you born like a day before the Drew Pearson game?
Yes, I was. I was born the day before Drew Pearson pushed off and ruined what I'm told was the strongest Vikings team's season of all time.
So we're not here to exactly just relive everything from that specific game or the pain, but like this.
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
I started
okay,
with Drew Pearson. Let me start with Drew Pearson.
Okay.
Also,
this is where
also
it started.
I watched tape of this game, so I'm prepared to.
You came with
relive it.
tape? Okay. What? Okay.
Yeah.
What?
Why?
Well, I don't write poetry, so I figured
Yeah.
I needed to find something to bring to the show.
Tell me things that surprised you when you went back and watched it, or that you hadn't remembered the same way.
I had kind of forgotten the degree to which the Vikings, I don't want to say had the game won, but were dominant near the end of the first half. They had given up a touchdown to the Falcons on the opening drive. They came back with a touchdown pass to Moss, and then Atlanta had two fumbles that the Vikings recovered. They turned those into 10 points. Anyway, they were up 20-7.
Yes.
And late in the half, and then that's when Cunningham got strip sacked with like a minute to go, and next play, Chris Chandler touchdown pass, and it was 20-14, and all of a sudden it was actually a game. They could have pretty much put it out of reach in that first half. And then the other thing from the second half, the overtime, I think the 2009 NFC Championship game was the one that kind of pushed the NFL to make that change, so that to give each team a chance, more or less, in overtime. The Vikings had two chances in overtime. They won the toss, and so obviously had the ball first, and they only got like 2 first downs in both of those drives. And then on third, I had forgotten how close they were to winning it on the second drive. It was, I think, 3rd and 10. Cunningham underthrew Moss, who was running wide open down the field. And he underthrew him by enough that Eugene Robinson broke it up at the last second. It was a fantastic play. And in retrospect, I wonder if Eugene Robinson regrets making that play, because if he doesn't make it, Moss probably scores a touchdown. At the very least, it's the chip shot field goal range. And then, of course, he went on.
Did something happen to Eugene Robinson that next week?
And so I had kind of forgotten like how close the Vikings were to just winning it on a Cunningham to Moss bomb, and how appropriate that would have seemed for that season, instead of just being appropriate for the Vikings history. which is what it turned out to be.
I don't remember that play at all. Keith, do you remember that play?
Now that Tim brings it up, I do remember that did happen. Yes. And by the way, apropos of well, mostly apropos of nothing else. Do you remember what Chris Chandler's nickname was?
Crystal Chandelier.
Yeah, he got injured all the time. They used to call him Crystal Chandelier.
Yes.
That was a mean nickname.
That's a good one though. Like like a crystal chandelier, like the most fragile thing you could imagine. That's what they called him. But yeah, here's the thing: the Falcons were they like 9.5 or 10-point underdogs, but they were 14-2 that year. Like it's it's not like they were playing like some complete dog of a team. But to Tim's point, like they did at various points have that game won, and even the play. Unfortunately, everybody remembers the Anderson miss with like 2:07 left would have put him up by 10. Not like the game is over, but 2 scores back then at that point feels like it would have pretty much done it. But 2 or 3 different times, even if you count the Moss play, like there are moments in that game where if the thing doesn't happen, they probably go to the Super Bowl. Now, here's the thing, like everybody. I don't know if it was Sid that was driving this narrative or if it just became like kind of calcified over time, but the narrative to help ease the pain has been, but a lot of Vikings were hurt. They would have got blown out by the Broncos in that Super Bowl anyway. I don't know if that's true or not. It would have been nice to find out. It would have been nice to find out anyway.
Well, I actually buy that narrative, at least to a certain extent, because exactly as you say, there are 2 things there. One is that, as you said, the Falcons were 14-2. They were just 1 game behind that amazing Vikings team, right? So it's not like they were the worst team in the world. They were actually, or that they were just Cinderellas or upstarts or what have you. They were a very, very good team, and then went and got destroyed in the Super Bowl by another 14-2 team that was the defending champs, right? So their path actually was much harder than we tend to remember it, because we remember the glory of that particular year, which is why I have come around to believe that 2009 was really the last year. This 98 was horrible, just awful because of the way that they lost and was so deflating. But I do think in retrospect that there were a lot of injuries, that they were playing 2 very good teams, that they were not as set up to win as we like to believe, considering the totality of the circumstances of that season.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I'm with you, Mike, that I would have wanted to find out. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat this as like, well, actually, it's a good thing they lost. They probably would have lost to Denver. They did. Like Robert Smith went out at the end of the NFC Championship game with a knee injury. They had a bunch of guys on defense hurt. But what made it so painful, I think, is even knowing that they, when you think about it logically, they probably would have lost that game. That season just had such a feeling of inevitability to it. They had scored the most points in NFL history up to that point. I think they've been passed like 5 times since then or something like that. But at the time, the most potent offense ever. And then, of course, the narrative of Gary Anderson not missing any kicks all year long, and then missing when it matters most. It had that feeling of this was a team that was seemingly destined to go all the way until they didn't.
To Keith's point earlier, like that was the year too, obviously, that changed the fan base. Like you guys remember, like the mid 90s, even when they were winning with Denny Green, it was like every week or every time they played like a non-glamorous opponent, it felt like General Mills had to buy 5,000 tickets just so there wouldn't be a blackout of the game on TV. Like this was not a team that was like capturing the imagination of everybody until that year.
Yeah, it was. We hear over and over again that it's a Vikings town, and which it is. But you're right. That might have been the case to a certain degree back then, but yeah, I remember those near blackouts really, really well. I think
so what you're saying is this is yet another thing we can blame on the boomers.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, blame the boomers.
I think didn't Red McCombs have to buy some tickets so that a couple of the preseason games didn't get blacked out? I'm trying to remember, but anyway,
Probably.
Soon enough that got wiped out, and it was largely because of Randy Moss.
And I remember
Purple Pride.
I remember it was like 90. I was 94 or 95, somewhere in there. Like it was my freshman year, so it must have been 94. I think it was 94. The Vikings played like a Thursday night game against the Packers, and I had a roommate who was a Packers fan, John. You remember John Rocket, of course. He was our roommate for a little while too, and his high school friend Chad, and we decided like last minute to go to that game and just like walked up to the Metrodome and like bought tickets to a Thursday night Packers game just like on the spot. Like you probably could not do that these days, and you probably would be paying a little bit. I don't think a college student necessarily on our budgets could probably afford to do that these days.
So does that make it better or worse?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of miss, when we get nostalgic for things like the Dome, which I do sometimes. I like, Keith, you and I went to a ton of games. Tim, you and I probably did too, like in the late 90s when they were bad, but you had like the dollar seats, the cheap seats for students. You had like, the left field.
We have to describe the scene, right? We have to describe the scene that you and I at one point, above and beyond, I think it was the cat package that inspired us to get season tickets.
Yes.
But we looked into it and we found the perfect season tickets for our situation.
The obstructed view.
So we had seats 8 and 11 in a row 4025.
Section 235.
Yeah, way up in the corner of the Metrodome.
Yes.
And what was great about it is we were right by one of the poles that held up the dome that deflated a number of years later, right? And so there weren't any actual seats. There weren't 9 and 10 didn't have any actual seats because they were right behind the pole. And so when you sat in your seat, you could see 85% of the field. You had to sort of lean over when you wanted to see the rest of the action, right? But way up there, and it was perfect because it was $99 because there were such crappy seats to watch the Vikings
for the whole year. Imagine that.
Whole year.
Imagine season tickets to the Vikings for $99.
It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. But again, you asked the question: is it better or worse? Because we had the kind of access to those games on our budget. Even though they were obstructed view, we could figure out a way to get into that building. Nowadays, you just can't. Not in the same way.
No, you can't. And I think
it's not better or worse because they still lose, right?
Yeah,
it's the same thing ultimately.
But I mean, you used to be able to do that with a lot of teams. Like, remember the Timberwolves did they were bad for so long that they had to do this, but they had like the pay the pick promotion where it was like when whatever their draft pick was in the lottery, that was how many dollars season tickets were going to be per game. And you were like hoping to get the number one pick. So you'd have like $1 season tickets for.
And what was it? It was $2 for a ticket to a Twins game with a student ID.
Yes, it was $2
as well too.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Royal Credit Union's Smart Checking accounts offer no monthly fees and no minimum balance. Enjoy financial freedom when you open your Royal Credit Union Smart Checking account online at rcu.org/go-checking. Insured by NCUA.
We're just sitting around talking like a bunch of old guys, but it was a different era.
I wonder why that
which
is.
We are. Which
Boy,
we are.
That's so surprising.
These are facts. These are indisputable facts. But it was a different era. But that team, that '98 team, did change. I mean, it changed things. I mean, if you don't have that team, if you don't have Moss, like, I don't know how real the threat was eventually, but like, do they stay eventually? Does that team just kind of like falter? Do they eventually move to Los Angeles, like all those empty threats? I don't really know. We don't really know, but that changed the trajectory of the franchise, even if they lost that game.
Yeah, McCombs, I'm trying to remember. I do remember some saber rattling later on in his tenure about a new stadium. And yeah, I don't know how real the threat was, but the Moss season did kind of change everything in that regard.
They they didn't get a new stadium didn't open until 18 years later. So I guess they were willing to be somewhat patient. But
right.
But that era, I mean, 2 years later they go to the NFC title game again, and that anniversary, it's not it's not one of those kind of milestone anniversaries, but that anniversary was just a couple days ago too, the 41 donut game. And then there's the season in the middle where they kind of just wasted time, and they had Jeff George, and they lost to the Rams in the division round, and Denny Green claimed that they would have won. They just ran out of time. That was one of my favorite favorite Dennyisms, and it all kind of gives way to the Mike Tice era, which is one of Keith's most regretted eras of Vikings history.
Even though I hated him so much.
You still had tickets for part of that, I believe.
Yeah, it did. Certainly. But I want to say something else about the game as well, too.
Yes, please do.
Speaks to Tim's point from earlier as well, which is just this sort of sense of inevitability that this felt like the team. And again, in retrospect, we can see that maybe like I said, it was a much harder path than we imagine, thinking about having that feeling of inevitability. But part of what made the game so disappointing was it felt like they did it to themselves. Right. That it was their own stuff and things that they did that made them lose that game. Right. So it was the Gary Anderson miss, which somehow we have not spent 15 minutes talking about. Right.
Just as well.
It was It was that underthrown pass to Moss that Tim reminded us of. That could have been. It was, and how we have not talked about taking a knee at the end of the second half with the most potent offense in NFL history, right? How do you not give those guys a chance to make up for what happened with the strip sack? So that was more
egregious, than I remembered, by the way, and rewatching parts of that game, because I was thinking like, it must have been like 3rd and long or something like that, and they must have been like pinned way deep to take a knee. No, it was 3rd and 3, and they were at their own 27, and they had 2 timeouts left. So I know that the reason they kneeled was because they didn't want to have an incomplete pass and give Atlanta the ball back with any time left. But I mean, they could have easily gotten a 5-yard out or something like that.
Or just run the ball. You can run the ball. You can run the ball. And hey, maybe you get 4 yards. Who knows?
Yeah. At least it's not like literally giving up, So that just felt like a surrender to the ghosts of what happened at the end of the first half.
Wasn't Leroy Horde on that team? He always got 3 yards? That was like the whole joke. That was the Madden joke. Like, if you need 2 yards, I'll get you 3. If you need 5 yards, I'll get you 3.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the, again, so one thing is, it felt like they did it to themselves, which what really, really hurt about that game. But the other thing about it is that I think that's where, on occasion, I'm accused of being a little cynical, right? And
who would say that?
I know, it's so strange. It's so strange to hear that. I don't know where that comes from. Must be your
enemies, not your friends, that would say that.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also a reminder of how much bluster there is in this world, as if we need another reminder right now, right? Because all of these football coaches, right? And Zimmer drove me nuts about this. This is the thing that I think I ended up disliking about him the most, is that we'd hear all this rhetoric from these football coaches about how you have to have courage, you have to do your job, you have to put it all on the line, you have to give everything 110%. You can't go out there with any fear. You can't go out there thinking you're going to lose. And all of this stuff about courage and fortitude and strength. And then what does Denny Green do in a critical moment in the biggest game of his Vikings tenure, but give up with the most potent offense in NFL history? And the lack of courage that you see from a lot of these coaches in these situations just drives me insane. And the sort of hypocrisy that goes along with it. There's this rhetoric about fortitude and courage and strength all goes out the window when the coach's decision making's on the line. And that was one of those moments where everything turned, right? Denny lost the city when he did that. That was sort of the end. There were a lot of people who didn't like him to begin with. I can't imagine why, Okay, I can't imagine what about Denny Green might have led some people to perhaps not like him in the first place. But that was the moment where it felt like it was over for that tenure, even though they did go to the championship game not long after that.
And you mentioned Madden earlier. There was zero. He and Summerall didn't criticize that call at all. They just said like, and now they're going to play for overtime. Like it was just the most normal thing in the world. And I don't know, maybe has football changed that much in the 25 years? Like that seemed like a terrible decision at the time. And especially when you didn't have the possibility, or you didn't have not so much the guarantee, but a better chance of getting the ball in overtime. Like, for all he knew, that could have been the last snap of the entire season. They could have lost the toss, and it just seemed like it seemed like more of a gamble to take a knee than it was to try to actually get a first down and move the ball.
Well, especially since there's no downside really to trying, even if you go ultra conservative and run the ball there, it's not like you're in 3rd and 12. Like 3rd and 3, you might run the ball and pick up a first down. Then you can call your timeout and see if you can move the ball and get into field goal range.
And Atlanta had no timeouts left, so they couldn't do much. Yeah.
And I was in the building, as I mentioned, I was in the building.
Who went with you? I can't remember.
So, that's the other thing about that day. It was so cold. It was so incredibly cold that day. And I ended up going with I was a student janitor at the University of Minnesota at the time, right? And I ended up going with a coworker, another fellow student who I happened to know, and he was a nice enough guy, and I liked him. We weren't the best of friends, but I couldn't think anybody else at the time who might want to go to this particular. So I went with him, and it was so very, very cold. And at the end of it, I was just numb. Right. I didn't even want to talk to anybody. And it was a good thing that there was a holiday the day after, so I didn't have to talk to anybody that next day. And when the game was over, I remember I'd never seen 60,000 people so silent as they just shuffled out. And there was a small pocket of women, about 3 or 4, with Atlanta Falcons jerseys on, who were really celebrating in one small part of the stadium. And we just sort of shuffled out, and it was freezing. And we ended up picking up this woman who was crying because she was so cold. And she asked us to drive us somewhere. Turns out she had us drive her to the liquor store, and then asked for money. And that's where we kind of drew the line, right? But so I went with this coworker, and we just didn't talk much in the car after that. And I was thinking about it in the wake of your asking to do this podcast. And I remember it's like, okay, I went to this game with this guy. I don't know if I ever saw him again after that.
That's weird.
I really don't know. It's like I must have run into him at work after that at some point in time, but it's like almost like he just sort of disappeared with the game, right? It made him dissolve into the ether.
Let's blame him. Can we blame him?
Sure, why not?
Yeah. Meanwhile, Tim and I, like I said, like we were bummed, right? Like I was going to go to the game. I don't know, Tim, I can't remember if you had tickets originally or not, but
no, I did not.
But if you have your choice, probably like watching that game with me in a tiny enclosed space versus like having an actual like hopefully celebratory party probably wasn't what we had in mind. But yeah, trying to write about that afterwards was just like nobody wanted to do it at that point.
No, I remember us trying to figure out like what's our like we had to come up with the play of the quarter.
What was quarter. Possibly the play of the quarter of the fourth quarter?
I believe we talked about having the taking a knee play be the play of the quarter. I don't think our editors would have appreciated that.
That was at the end of the first half, though, right?
Taking a knee? No,
taking
that was
the end of the game.
Quarter.
At the end of the first half was where they should have taken a knee or could have taken a knee, but ended up fumbling. And
Yep.
So I'm sure the play of the quarter was the missed field goal, right? Or was it the touchdown that tied the game? I can't remember even.
I believe we talked about doing the missed field goal too, but I'm pretty sure we ended up going with the tying touchdown pass.
Which cowards.
Another thing that I forgot is that Robert Griffith had a shot at two times he had a shot at an interception on that game-tying drive too, including one in the end zone that was right before the play before the time touchdown pass. Neither one of them was like a gimme by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just a couple of those, two more of those. Just if just one more thing had gone right for the Vikings, that they would have won.
Can we be done talking about this?
I'm really glad I made you watch that game again. I'm really glad I made you guys talk about this game, but we can be done. Thank you guys. 25 years. At least we're all still friends. We made it through, and thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks.
I hope that was cathartic or at least informative. After talking to those guys, I had to go back and watch the play that Tim was referencing where Moss was open in overtime, but there was an underthrow. And yeah, that was pretty egregious. That could have ended the game, or like he said, at least got them into field goal range. Instead, the pass broken up. And there you have it. One other thing that caught my eye when I was watching that, you can watch the full replay of the game on this is available on YouTube right now. You can watch the full replay of that game pretty easily. Right before they took a knee at the end of regulation, it was 2nd and 3. Cunningham goes back to pass. It's like 2nd and 3 from the from the Vikings' own 27. He goes back to pass. He kind of rolls to his right because he feels a little bit of pressure. Moss is running deep in double coverage. He throws it up to Moss. He misses Moss. Moss got turned around a little bit. But if you watch the replay, I know Cunningham was at the end of his career. He wasn't running like he was early in his career. He only ran 32 times that year for 132 yards, but could still scramble. He had a bunch of room on the right side. Could have easily, in my estimation, run for at least a first down, maybe more. Probably could have gotten out of bounds at like the 35, and maybe from there, they still got the 2 timeouts, like Tim's saying, maybe from there they can move into field goal range in that time. Certainly wouldn't have taken a knee on the next play. So another woulda, coulda, shoulda moment from that game. Not trying to relitigate something that happened from 25 years ago. You can't change what happened. He could have easily, Moss could have come down with that ball, winning game, touchdown, things like that. That could have been the way the game ended. It didn't, but every time you watch a game like that, you find one extra moment that you don't realize in real time, or you didn't even realize over the years. They kind of calcify around these like signature things: the take a knee, the wide left, the the strip sack, everything that happens along the way. You kind of forget about these other little moments that could have turned the game, and that was one that caught my eye upon a quick rewatching. Let us finish with the cooler now. What a wild NFL head coaching cycle this is going to be, right? Jim Harbaugh and Bill Belichick available. Both of them have, by the way, already interviewed with the Falcons. Harbaugh's also interviewed with the Chargers. Wonder if there's going to be some other high-profile vacancies. Just as I said that, I paused recording and make sure that Dallas hadn't fired Mike McCarthy yet. You wonder if that could become an opening, especially if Belichick was interested in going there, although a power coach and owner Jerry Jones don't necessarily mix all that well. But what a wild coaching cycle this is going to be with those two guys out there. A lot of names out there, a lot of teams floating around that need coaches. Just kind of struck me. I don't think we've seen a coaching cycle like this for a while, where guys of that caliber were suddenly going to be available in the NFL. And it does remind you too, Harbaugh seemed like he was pretty close to getting the Vikings job a couple of years ago when Kevin O'Connell got it instead. Interesting to think about hindsight there and what could have been, what might have been, what could have been different if the Vikings had gone in that direction. That will do it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. I'm going to have Randy Johnson on Thursday show to talk Gopher hockey, maybe a little Gopher football as well. Chip Scoggins on Friday show to talk about his latest project that's coming out this weekend. So lots of good stuff coming up. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Back at it again tomorrow.